So today we're going to talk about insects. We're going to talk about what they are and where they live and what they do for a living and how they grow. I have been in love with insects for a long time. I'm kind of an insect ambassador. I've been interested in them since I have been a kid, and I do an awful lot of insect photography, and I write a weekly email blast called Bug of the Week, which is archived at the UWM Field Station website, and there will be an address at the very end. So the first thing we have to figure out is, what is an insect? If I were beaming down from Mars and I heard you talking about insects, how would I know the difference between an insect and a Cocker Spaniel and an SUV or a color television? So the answer to that is that insects have three body parts. The head is the top part, the thorax is the middle part, and the abdomen is the end part. They have 6 legs, which are attached to the thorax, and they have wings. Most insects have wings, and most of the insects that have wings have 4 of them, and those are also attached to the thorax, which makes it a pretty busy place. The beetle has 4 wings, but the front set of wings has been modified into a hard covering, and that allows the beetle to climb underneath logs and leaves and rocks and things like that without shredding its flying wings. But that adaptation comes at a cost. When it flies, it has to hold those hard wing coverings out to the side. It looks a little like a biplane, and it flies awkwardly, and it also lands awkwardly. Insects are in a large group called the phylum Arthroptera, and Arthroptera means jointed legs. So we have jointed legs, and we are not arthropods. There are a couple of really big differences between us and arthropods. Number one, we have a skeleton inside our body that has muscles attached to it, and that's what allows us to stay upright. Insects do not have bones, and their muscles are attached to the inside of a kind of a stiff outer shell called an exoskeleton. The other big difference between us and arthropods is that we are warm-blooded, which means that a certain amount of the food that we eat every day has to be used to keep our core temperature the same at about 98 degrees. Insects are cold-blooded, which means that their internal body temperature is pretty much the same as the outside temperature. So if you're cold-blooded, that means that you don't have to eat as much because you don't have to do that internal heating. And if you don't have any bones, the big drawback is that you can't get very big because you can't support yourself unless you're living in the water. What is not an insect? These are all the members of the spider family. I often ask an audience, if I pulled 2 legs off of a spider, would it make it an insect? Spiders have 8 legs, insects have 6, and your spider that's missing a couple legs is still a spider. The one on the left is one of the orb weavers that you'll see toward the end of summer. The one on the top right is a daddy longlegs, and I'm always having people telling me that daddy longlegs will bite them and they're allergic to the bite. And the fact is that daddy longlegs absolutely cannot bite you. They do not have mouth parts that allow them to bite you. And the bottom one is called a long-bellied cellar spider, which was photographed in my shower one morning. And it looks very similar to daddy longlegs, but daddy longlegs typically are not inside unless they wander in by mistake, and long-bellied cellar spiders are rarely outside. Some more arthropods, the millipede, divided up into a whole bunch of segments, but not a million of them, or even 1,000. But each one of those segments has 2 legs on the left side of it and 2 legs on the right side of it. Right underneath it is a house centipede, and centipedes, some centipedes get very large and have a lot of legs, but not 100, and they have 1 leg on the left side and 1 leg on the right side. Everybody who has houseplants is familiar that they put outside on their porch is familiar with pill bugs or sow bugs. The top right is a deer tick, which I took off my dog one day. She is all blown up after a good meal. And, of course, we know the crayfish, which is a rusty crayfish, which is an invasive species here in Wisconsin. How many different kinds of insects are there, and why should we be interested in them? Think about that for a second. Okay, if you guessed 1,000,000, there are approximately 1,000,000 species of insects that are known now, and scientists are discovering a lot of them, a lot more all the time, and there are many that have been found and just are sitting in drawers someplace waiting for someone to figure out exactly what they are and to name them. The class Insecta is divided into 28 orders. Depending on whose book you read, it might be 24 or 26. 100,000 species in North America. And that's kind of an interesting number, because if you are a birder and you want to carry your field guide out into the field with you, you can have a book with about the 750 species of birds that are found in North America, and they're all between one covers, and it's all portable out into the field. There is not a field guide on the 100,000 species of North America that you would carry into the field. 18 to 20,000 species in Wisconsin, in that the average home contains between 32 and 100 and 211 species of arthropod. That high number is from some homes in South Carolina. There are estimated 10,000 trillion ants on the planet. If you put all of the ants on one end of a cosmic teeter-totter and all the people on the other end of the cosmic teeter-totter, our feet would be dangling. Why should we be interested in them? Well, they help us in a lot of ways. They're bird food and they're pollinators. They are everywhere. They are at mountaintops. They are in Sulphur Springs. They are in Great Salt Lake. They can adapt to just about any living condition. They do everything, and we're going to see some of the jobs that they do. They've been around for a very long time, and they really, really, really outnumber us. And some are beautiful. This is a Luna moth. It's one of the giant silk moths. There should be Luna moths flying any day now. Their flight period is during the end part of June. This one has a wingspan of about 4 inches. I had a professor when I was in school who said, "Don't tell them what it is, tell them what about it." And so I love collecting the stories of insects. This is a stink bug. She is laying eggs on the outside of my house. And on each one of those legs, she is leaving she's leaving a little deposit of bacteria. And the reason she's doing that is that if you are an insect that eats plant material, you need to have certain bacteria in your gut so that you'll be allowed to, or be able to digest the plant material. So when her young hatch out, one of the first things that they will do is to eat the eggshell. And that way they will pick up the bacteria that they will need in their guts for the rest of their lives. Another really cool story, there's a lot of insects like to web leaves together and shelter inside them or feed inside of them. There are some tropical ants that like to feed inside of these leaf shelters, and the problem is that the adult ants are not able to produce any sort of silk to web the leaves together. So a bunch of ants will get together and they'll pull together some edges of the leaves, and the other worker ants will run down to the ant nursery and they'll grab some ant larvae, and the larvae are able to make silk. So while you have a bunch of adult ants that are holding the leaf together, you have other ants that are holding these larvae up and using them to stitch the edges of the leaf together. We've all heard a lot about the Asian murder hornets that have been found in the Pacific Northwest and are really devastating for beehives. And honeybees in Japan have figured out a way to deal with these murder hornets that raid their hives. They have sentry bees in the entrance of the hive, and when they see one of these murder hornets coming, they will signal the other bees, usually with pheromones, which are little chemicals that the insects can loosen into the air. And a whole bunch of bees will fly out of the hive, and they will make a globe around the murder hornet. It's just this ball of bees around the hornet, and they will fan their wings so hard that the temperature in the middle of this ball of bees gets so hot that it kills the murder hornet. I mean, you can't make that stuff up. It's just really amazing stuff. Here's one with an interesting story. I live on a dune right next to Lake Michigan, and I noticed in the sand that there were these little kind of volcanic indentations in the sand. And I got all excited because these are made by doodlebugs, and doodlebug is the larva of a little critter called an antlion. So the doodlebug walks around backwards in the sand, pitching sand up over its shoulders and making this dent in the sand. And then it hides at the bottom with its impressive mouth parts sticking out, as you can see in the top left. And it waits for a little beetle or an ant or something like that. It's walking along in the sand and climbs down into the hole, and when it tries to get out, the loose sand slips and slides underneath its feet and it can't get out. And then the doodlebug has a meal. When it is all finished being a larva, it will emerge as this little winged creature that looks kind of like a damselfly, and that's called an antlion. So the young insect and the older insect have two different names. So I'm going to throw a lot of information at you. I'm going to throw you pictures of, show you pictures of a lot of different insects, and there's not going to be a quiz. But what I want you to think about is, wow, there are an awful lot of different kinds of insects around. They do an amazing number of things, and most of them are happening right below my radar. They're coexisting with me. I don't know anything about them. They're not harming me. I'm not harming them. There are two main ways that insects grow. Simple metamorphosis is the first one, and in simple metamorphosis, when the insect comes out of its egg, it looks pretty similar to what it's going to look like as an adult. So it might shed its skin, called molting, 5 or 6 times over the summer, and as it sheds its skin, it adds some body parts, it adds reproductive structures, and it adds wings. And finally, after about 6 or 8 molts, it's a full adult. We've been hearing a lot about the brood 10 cicadas recently. We don't have those in this. There are some right along the southern part of Wisconsin in some years, but we have a different bunch of cicadas here. And the top left 2 pictures are one of our dog day cicadas. As a nymph, they live underneath the ground eating plant juices, and then they climb up on a tree when it's time to turn into an adult, and they take a deep breath and split the back of their skin and climb out as an adult, that little green-winged guy. The yellow ones are aphids that were taken on a milkweed. These are oleander aphids. Aphids can reproduce, females can reproduce without having a male around for part of the year, and the naturalists like to say that an aphid that starts at the bottom of a plant stem is probably a grandmother by the time she gets to the top of the plant stem, because her young are popping out babies pretty fast. And there's your stink bug and baby stink bugs, and the grasshopper with a shed skin of the grasshopper. After they molt, they have a very short window while the skin is still soft. And so they do a lot of eating then so that they can grow a little bit before that exoskeleton solidifies. Complete metamorphosis is what we're familiar with. Everybody knows about monarchs. They are eggs. They are caterpillars that eat only milkweed. They turn into a chrysalis. In other groups of insects, we call it a pupal case. And the chrysalis is that green, jeweled-looking object on the bottom left. And then they turn into adults. And the interesting thing about insects with complete metamorphosis, and that includes the butterflies and the beetles and the ants, wasps, and a few others, is that usually the larva occupies a completely different habitat than the adult will, and the larva eats a completely different food than the adult will. The interesting thing is what is happening in that chrysalis or pupal case. The caterpillar, the body of the caterpillar, basically turns into mush inside of that chrysalis, except for some cells called histoblasts. And the histoblasts are organizing cells. So they take out of that soup that is now inside the chrysalis all of the materials that they need to rebuild the body and the organs, and to form the adult, which is going to emerge from that chrysalis. Somebody asked me once whether praying mantises were invasive species. We do not have native praying mantises here in Wisconsin, although there are some in the south. But the praying mantises that we see here, usually in August and September, are either Chinese mantises or European mantises. And you can actually tell the difference. The European mantis pictured here has a little bullseye pattern in its armpit. So yes, the insects, the mantises that we have here are not from Wisconsin, and they're not even from the United States. So they are alien, they are exotic, they are introduced, or they are non-native. But invasive, which sometimes people use in the same way they use the other four words, invasive means that they occur in such large numbers that they affect their habitat around them. They affect the other organisms. So you can buy praying mantises. If you're a gardener, you can buy praying mantises to take care of insect pests in your garden. It works. The problem is that to a praying mantis, a meal is a meal is a meal, and so a honeybee looks just as good as a cutworm. Do we have alien insects in Wisconsin? Yes, we do, and we know that some of them come inside in the wintertime, like the Asian multicolored ladybug. Brown marmorated stink bugs are a huge problem in the mid-Atlantic coast, and they have reached Wisconsin about 12 years ago, and they're a big pest of orchard crops. Emerald ash borers were discovered in Detroit. They are an Asian beetle. It's a beautiful little beetle, but it's going to kill 99.9% of the ash trees in Wisconsin. The first one was discovered near Newburgh about 10 or 15 years ago, and typically with these guys, by the time you start finding them, they have been on the scene for about 5 years, and they've got a pretty good foothold. The middle picture is a Japanese beetle. I got an email from my sister about 10 years ago, and she said, "There's beetles all over my raspberry bushes. I don't know what they are." And she sent a picture, and of course it was a Japanese beetle. And they have big ears, and they have not so big ears. But gypsy moth caterpillars, I have to admit that I don't have any plantings at my house that you would call a horticultural planting, and the idea of gypsy moths and controlling gypsy moths, I just don't go crazy with that. Gypsy moths have been in this country for about 125 years. They are a failed experiment from somebody who was going to raise them and turn them into a silk industry in America. If you drive out in the Boston area, there are huge forests all over the place, and Boston area is ground zero for gypsy moths. So we've been trying to control them with everything we've got for the last 125 years, and we have failed, and the forests haven't died. And so it's just, to me, the chemicals that are used on gypsy moth control are not specific to gypsy moths for the most part, and so if you want to be a butterfly, you have to be a larva first, and if you're hit with a larvicide, you're never going to be a butterfly. And Great Lakes Worm Watch is a good place to get information about earthworms. Because of the glaciers, there were no earthworms left in Wisconsin after the glaciers retreated. So the earthworms that we have here are earthworms that were brought in by people who were planting fruit trees, and they came in with the root bundles, and they're wonderful in your garden, and they're terrific on your lawn, but they are not good for forests at all. And you can get more information from Great Lakes Worm Watch. So, who eats who? A big part of an insect's life. You can see Wisconsin's state bird there, the mosquito. Only female mosquitoes suck blood, and they need to have a protein meal before they can eat eggs, and make eggs, and that's why they do that. Going clockwise, praying mantis with a bumblebee. The bottom right hand is a robber fly, and they are amazing flies. They will go after anything that they can possibly subdue, and in this case it looks like the butterfly is a little bit bigger than the robber fly. The bottom middle picture is a ladybug larva, and the bottom left is a ladybug. I told you that when they have complete metamorphosis, usually the larva has a different diet than the adult does, but in ladybugs, they both love to eat aphids. And the top left, you'll say, "Kate, that's not a carnivore, that's a butterfly," and you would be absolutely right. But The caterpillar of this butterfly, which is called the harvester butterfly, is the only carnivorous caterpillar that we have in North America. And it eats the little woolly alder aphids, and it disguises itself with little pieces of wool, and it sneaks into the little colonies of woolly aphids and eats them. Herbivores are plant eaters, a lot of different kinds. Some of them chew on leaves. Some of them, like the aphids or like the milkweed bugs, suck juices out of plants. The guy on the daisy is a male mosquito, and male mosquitoes and sometimes female mosquitoes will suck plant juices. And of course, the kids call spittlebugs on the top left snake spit or frog spit. And what's happening in there is that there's a soft-bodied little nymph that has plugged its mouth parts into the plant stem, and it's sucking out plant juices. Now, most plant sap does not have a real high amount of sugar in it, so it has to suck out an awful lot of sap in order to get some calories. And the excess sap exits the rear end of the insect. In this case, the little spittlebug has basically a little cappuccino machine there, and it froths the liquid as it leaves and adds a little latex so that the spittle will last for a while. The adult spittlebug eats exactly the same thing as the nymph does, but it's lost the ability to make spittle. Aphids produce honeydew. It's just, again, it's the excess plant sap that goes through their body and is deposited. And if you've ever seen a leaf that looked a little shiny, that's honeydew. Look up and you'll probably find a little bunch of little aphids above it. So there are a lot of insects that like to eat honeydew, and there are ants that take care of herds of aphids. They farm them just like farmers do. They protect them from predators, and they move them around on the plant to find good places to eat. Tree hoppers, the guys on the bottom right, are another kind of insect that makes honeydew, and the ants will also take care of them. And so there's that little butterfly in the bottom left. Ants will also take care of the caterpillars of azure butterflies, because the azure butterflies will also give up some honeydew, and the ants will take care of them. They'll bring them up on the plants during the daytime, and then they'll bring them down into the anthill at night. Scavengers and decomposers and recyclers will clean up the area for us. There's nothing in nature that goes to waste, so all of these guys clean up large and small dead animals, or in the case of the top guy in the middle, which is one of the squash bugs, he will be found on bird droppings. But the carrion beetles and the burying beetles are really fascinating because they prepare a place on a dead carcass for their eggs, and they will lay their eggs on this, or sometimes they'll form some dead body into a little ball, a little meatball, and lay their egg on it. If you look at the beetle that is flipped over on the bottom left, you can see some little peach-colored dots on it, and those are actually mites. And the mites join the beetle when it pupates underground, and when it crawls out of the ground, it has these little mites on it, and they don't harm the beetle at all. They just travel from place to place with it. It's called foracy. And when this beetle lays its eggs on a carcass, the mites will hop off, and what they like to eat is the larvae of the flies that also are eating the carcass. So it's carrying these little mites along, and when it gets to the place where it lays its eggs, the mites are going to help the beetle larvae by picking off some of the competition. This is one of my favorite insects. The two wasps on the right-hand side of the slide. They're called giant ichneumon wasps. Ichneumon means hunter, and they have a very long set of 3 filaments that trail along in back of them as they fly. Usually you see them about this time of year, going into midsummer. And they do not sting. You might look at that and think it's a gigantic stinger, but it's not. They do not sting, but what they're looking for is the pigeon horntail on the left. The pigeon horntail lays its eggs in rotting wood, and its larvae are living in chambers in the rotting wood. And the giant ichneumon wasp flies over to a rotting tree, and it taps on the tree, and it uses a kind of echolocation to figure out if there are horntail larvae in there and where they are. And then it takes that long set of filaments, which is called an ovipositor, an egg depositor. And you can see in the bottom picture a sort of a white disc. It uses that to strengthen the ovipositor as it punctures the tree bark. But it's precision boring into the trunk, and it will deposit its eggs in the same chamber that the horntail larvae are living in. And when its egg hatches, its larva will hatch out, will come out, and will have dinner served right there. Parasitoids will live on or in their host for a while, keeping them alive because they want their meat to be fresh, until the parasitoid is ready to pupate itself, and then it will kill its host. And the ichneumon wasp larva will come out the same little tunnel that the pigeon horntail made going in. Some insects do not eat at all, like mayflies on the top right. They're only around for a couple days at most. If insects eat plants, do plants eat insects? And the answer is yes. On the top left, you can see a round-leaved sundew, and it's trapped a little damselfly. The sundew has some sticky filaments on it, and when an insect gets trapped, it will slowly fold the spoon over, and it takes a couple hours to do that, and it takes about 24 hours to digest the insect. You should know, because I'm a big fan of dragonflies and damselflies, I took the picture and then I loosened the little eastern forktail from the sundew's grip and let it fly away. And then the other question, of course, is, do people eat insects? And the answer is yes. We're having this big cicada outbreak in the southeastern part of the state, and every time that happens, there are all kinds of recipe contests for eating cicadas. It's called entomophagy. If you have seen Dances with Wolves or other Western shows where Native Americans would chase a band of bison and try to kill some while the bison were running during the drive, if you were a really good rider, you might the drive might last about 10 minutes, and you might get 2 bison during that time. But the same tribes that drove the bison also had locust drives, because they ate locusts, and native peoples all over the world have taken advantage of this free protein that is provided by insects. There is a lot of movement right now toward increasing our consumption of insects, because the ecological footprint for raising a bunch of crickets or whatever is much smaller than raising a bunch of cattle. Do insects have an economic impact? They sure do. And if you're a gardener of any kind, you recognize the tomato hornworm, the squash moth. The guy on the bottom left is the corn earworm. Colorado potato beetle is an interesting story, because this is a native beetle that lived quietly in the Rocky Mountains until the first white settlers came across the country and started planting their kitchen gardens. It was growing on a bunch of potato relatives like buffalo burr, and keeping numbers in check with its environment. And all of a sudden, people were planting tomatoes and potatoes, which are also in that family, and the Colorado potato beetle looked around and said, dinner is served. And so not only did it take advantage of the potatoes and tomatoes in the kitchen garden, but it hopscotched east from garden to state, and it's a reverse migrant. It took it about 40 years to get from the Rocky Mountains to the East Coast. And there's that Japanese beetle again. A glamour shot of a deer fly. I was out in the bog yesterday and was seeing some deer flies, and the emerald ash borer. A lot of insects and spiders are used to control other insects and spiders, other insects and plants. So they do pest control for us, and they do pollination for us. The bottom left picture is a dragonfly that was called an eastern pondhawk, and most of the people I know who photograph dragonflies have had the experience of zooming in on a dragonfly, and it will hop off of its perch and fly in back of your head and then land on its perch again with either a mosquito or a deer fly that was about to eat you. So yes, there are insects that help us with decomposition, and the insect on the top right is eating a glossy buckthorn, which is a very bad invasive shrub, and I'm anxious to find out what kind of, this is a sawfly, what kind of sawfly this is, so maybe we can serve up some more buckthorn to it. Insects depend on camouflage, especially when they are predators, but sometimes when they are prey. The goldenrod crab spider on the top left can be white or it can be yellow. It takes about 10 days for it to turn from white to yellow. And I've seen it on purple plants and on pink plants, and it doesn't do purple or pink. The bumblebee in the middle on the top is not actually a bumblebee, it is a robber fly. And apparently there's a big advantage to looking like a bumblebee because people don't mess with you. But I was watching this bumblebee, I thought it was a bumblebee sitting on a leaf, and all of a sudden it launched itself up in the air and chased a butterfly. And I thought, well, bumblebees don't do that. So this is a robber fly, and it is a carnivorous fly. The pond hawk is camouflaged on the top right. On the bottom left we have a little plant hopper that is disguised as a thorn. Right next to it is a caterpillar that covers itself with petals from flowers and disguises itself so that the birds can't find it. The middle picture looks like a housefly, but it's actually a beetle. And I have no idea what the advantage is for a fly to look like a beetle. I would think that the other way around, for a beetle to look like a fly, I would think the other way around would be more advantageous. And the bottom right picture, it's pickerel weed, and I sat there looking at that pickerel weed for a long time thinking there's something wrong with that plant. Pickerel weeds don't have green where that is green, and that's a great big praying mantis disguised in the pickerel weed. Okay, a lot of swallowtails here, and the swallowtails have some very cool camouflage that they use. On the left, black swallowtail. If you're a gardener, you've undoubtedly seen the black swallowtail caterpillars on your dill plants. They use what's called disruptive coloration, which is the same thing that zebras use. So the striping on that caterpillar kind of break it up and keep the predator from figuring out exactly what the shape of the caterpillar is. Underneath that is a green chrysalis. Black swallowtails have 2 broods every growing season. So they have one that forms a chrysalis in midsummer and then one that forms a chrysalis at the end of summer. The chrysalis in midsummer is green, and it's hard to find in all the growing plants. The chrysalis that is formed by the next generation has to go through winter, and it is brown. Tiger swallowtail in the middle, normal coloring on the top, and then there's the dark phase female, which is disguised as a different kind of swallowtail called a pipevine swallowtail, which lives farther south of us. So pipevine swallowtails are poisonous because they eat poisonous plants, and if she is a dark phase, then her predators will think that she is a poisonous swallowtail. Her caterpillar looks like bird poop at the start, but that amazing guy on the 2 pictures on the bottom right is also it's an older tiger swallowtail caterpillar, and it looks like a snakehead. And so if a predator comes near, it puts that little orange pronged affair out in front of its face. It looks like a snake tongue. And then the top right is the giant swallowtail, and its caterpillar also looks like a snake during part of its larva stage, and also looks like bird poop. Insects that eat poisonous plants don't have to worry about being camouflaged. So all of these guys are feeding on milkweed. Milkweed, longhorn beetle, the milkweed bugs, the monarch caterpillar, and the monarch butterfly is also poisonous because of the poison that is picked up by the caterpillar. On the bottom right, we have a viceroy butterfly, and the viceroy butterfly is cashing in on the fact that the birds think that monarchs are poisonous by mimicking the monarch caterpillar, or monarch butterfly. This is a dogbane leaf beetle. Isn't that a spectacular beetle? And it eats dogbane, which is a close relative of milkweed and is also poisonous. And it has a very cool way of feeding. It's right there, you can see it. It's right next to the vein of the dogbane leaf. Dogbane sap is very sticky, and the beetle does not want to get stuck in the sap, so it will puncture the vein farther down in the leaf, and it lets a whole bunch of sap drip out of that and form kind of a clot, and then it feeds above that on the leaf so it doesn't get stuck. What do insects do in winter? They don't have too many choices. Famously, the monarch butterfly and the common green darner at the top of the page are migrants. And if you are along the shore of Lake Michigan at the end of August and into September, you can see some nice movements of both monarchs and the darners. Some insects stay alive underneath the ice, and they are considerably slowed down or stopped. They're kind of in suspended animation. I was out with a naturalist one time years ago, and she was telling the students that the grasshoppers were dead and they didn't know it yet. The grasshopper that's in that milkweed pod with the frost on top is going to die. Most insects that are adults die when the cold weather comes. And they leave behind eggs and pupal cases. On the top in the middle is a goldenrod ball gall, which has a little larva, a little fly larva living in the middle of it, and it will go through the winter inside of that gall. The middle picture is a woolly bear caterpillar, which goes through the winter as a caterpillar, which is fairly uncommon. But when we have a warm day in January, sometimes you can see the woolly bears out walking around. The butterfly on the bottom right is one of the angle wings, and they go through the winter as adults, and they'll find a nice snug place and they'll tuck themselves in, and they have a natural antifreeze in their blood which keeps the ice crystals from forming in their cells. Bottom middle, if you are ever tempted to bring a paper wasp nest in as decoration, leave it in a plastic bag for a while. The queen bee, the new queen wasp for the next year is already underneath the ground, and she's going to spend the winter under the soil a little bit. But there might be some worker wasps that are still inside that paper shell, and if you bring it inside their house, they'll say, "It's nice and warm, I think I'll come out." So keep it in your house in a big heavy plastic bag for a while before you display it. And of course on the middle and bottom left-hand side, we have the Asian ladybugs that like to come inside and the box elder bugs that like to come inside. And they don't eat your dog food or your carpet or anything like that. They're not eating. They're just trying to be sheltered for the winter, and then when spring comes, they just want to find their way out again. We're not really talking too much about insects in water, but life goes on underneath the water during the winter time. And the insects that live in the water year-round are just amazing in appearance. The water is a nursery for some insects that are only there in their younger stages, like dragonflies and damselflies and caddisflies and things like that. And then it's a full-time home for other insects, predaceous water beetles and some of the others, the giant water bugs. And then you'll say, "Kate, that's a moth on the bottom right there, and moths are not aquatic." And I would say you're absolutely right, except this moth climbs down into the water and lays her eggs underneath the water, and she has a caterpillar that is aquatic. Insects have all kinds of superpowers. That's one of the fun things about reading about them, is finding all the different superpowers that they have. Stridulation is the act of rubbing one body part against another body part and producing sound. So a lot of the locusts and grasshoppers and katydids will produce sound in that way. The cicada produces sound by a drum-like membrane that's in between its thorax and its abdomen, and it vibrates that on the inside, and that's what causes the cicada to make noise. Paper wasp in the middle on the top can chew on any sort of papery or woody fabric or fiber and can mix it with saliva and can spit out paper. The top right is one of the mud daubers. It's called organ pipe mud dauber, and they will collect mud and they will make these chambers for their eggs. Middle on the right is a caddisfly larva, and the caddisflies collect whatever material in their habitat, whether it's they live in the water, and some of them use little plant stems and some of them use little tiny pieces of stone, and they'll make a case that they carry around like a turtle. The black beetle on the bottom right is a blister beetle, and they're around for the month of August on goldenrod. And if you touch one of those with your finger, you probably won't get a reaction, but if one of them bumps into the back of your neck, you'll get some big blisters there. And the guy in the middle is a bombardier beetle that carries around some chemicals inside of its abdomen, and when it's alarmed, it mixes those chemicals and sprays them at its predator. And they can be very precise about this. If you grab one of the left side legs with a forceps, it'll spray to the left, and if you grab on the right, it'll spray to the right. The dragonfly on the top left has immense compound eyes. It helps it to be the super predator that it is, and there are probably 25,000 eyes in each half of that wraparound eye. Lightning beetles are able to produce light without producing heat. So in an old incandescent light, probably 95% of the energy to that light was used as heat. And now we have a lightning beetle that only 5% of the energy that produces its light goes off in heat. The click beetle at the bottom left, if you flip it over on its back, it is able to arch its back and propel itself up to the air and then flip over while it's in the air and land on its feet. The little wild geranium flower, insects see ultraviolet light in a different way than we do. So the pale veins that you can see in there look like just a road map to an insect that flies in there, and it directs it to the pollen and the nectar in the middle of the flower. And if you look sharp, you can see a small male crab spider in the middle of that plant, and he is hoping that the predators will come along to visit his flower. We have another goldenrod ball gall here, and the gall story is really amazing. The female fly, it's not a house fly, lays her eggs on the growing tip of the goldenrod, and her larva tunnels in, and it produces a bunch of chemicals that are just like the chemicals that the plant produces to allow it to grow. So this little fly larva tricks the plant into growing this big thick gall around it. So the insect is living in the middle of this, and it's surrounded by its food supply. It's climate controlled, and most predators don't think to look for it there. It goes through the winter as a larva, and before it turns into a pupa, it has to remember to chew a little tunnel out to the outer edge of the gall, because the larva has chewing mouth parts, but the adult fly does not. The flies have what we call vacuum cleaner mouth parts. So it has to chew its way out to the shell of or the skin of the gall before it turns into a pupa, and if it doesn't do that, it can't get out of the gall. If it does do that, it crawls down the tunnel and butts its head against the dried skin on the outside of the gall and flies away. So when I was in school, my professor told me I should take an entomology course, because when I'm out teaching kids, 95% of the stuff they bring to me was going to be insects. And there are 7 orders of insects out of that 24 or 26 or 28, whatever number you read. There are 7 that are the most common. The Odonata, which are the dragonflies and damselflies. Dragonflies on the right-hand side of the page, when they perch, their wings are straight out to the side. And dragonflies have kind of wraparound compound eyes like we saw in that other slide. They are, for the most part, bigger and bulkier than damselflies. Damselflies on the left side of the page are usually much slimmer. They're usually much smaller. When they perch, they fold their wings over their back, or the bottom left one is one of the spread wings. They have their wings out in sort of a V. And their eyes are located on each side of their head, kind of like a hammerhead shark. These guys live underwater as immatures, and when they are ready to turn into an adult, they climb out onto the land. In the middle on the bottom is an empty shell, a dried shell, where the dragonfly took a breath, split the skin, pulled out, and then flew away. Orthoptera are the grasshoppers, locusts, crickets, katydids, and the top guy on the right is a tree cricket, which they make fantastic noises at the end of summer. Hemiptera, the bugs, come in just a huge variety of shapes and colors. In the top right picture, it doesn't look like there are any insects there, but all those little suction cup dark shapes are scale insects. Beetles, huge bunch. The beetles are the biggest bunch of animals we have, and the weevils are the biggest bunch within the beetles. Flies, the fly on the top right is one of my favorites. It's called a dance fly, and they're around right now in sort of shady, humid woodland areas. You'll notice that she has a bunch of hairs on her legs, which she can make stand up. And to use our terminology, it makes her look hippier. And to the male, it makes her look like she's going to be more fertile. So he brings her a gift of food when he's courting her. One of my absolute favorite insects is the guy on the bottom right. It's called a phantom crane fly. And they fly all summer in the kind of shady areas at the edge of wetlands. And they just kind of drift along and they bounce off of things, and they're just really, if you put your thumb and forefinger together, that's about the size of their leg span. And they're partly flying and they're partly floating. Lepidoptera, the butterflies and moths, there's really not a huge difference between butterflies and moths. One of the big differences that we all learned that moths have feathery antennae. Some of them have feathery antennae, and some of them, like the one on the bottom in the middle, which is the corn earworm moth, have a long filament for antenna. But butterflies always have a little knob at the end of their antenna. And then the last one of the most numerous groups are the Hymenoptera, or the ants, bees, and wasps. So now that you know all this good stuff, what are you going to do with it? Well, I love pussy willows. It puts a big hit of nectar and pollen out there for the very early insects to take advantage of. So one year I decided to watch my pussy willow and photograph all the insects that I could find on pussy willow. And I also love dandelions. It gives me a big hit of yellow early in the year. It cheers me up to see one dandelion, and it really cheers me up to see a whole field full of them. And again, they are a great food source for a lot of the early insects. Goldenrods and milkweeds are a fantastic plant that are a bunch of plants that have whole communities of insects that live on them and as from them. So one year I'm always watching goldenrod, and one year I watched goldenrod and did an article about goldenrod. And one year I even watched a wall. This was a wall that was on the east side of a building that got heated up in the morning, and then I watched it in the afternoon after the sun was gone, but the plaster was still warm, so that I could see all the different critters that came on that wall. This was a very warm November. And the spider on the top right-hand side of this picture, I sent it to my spider guy, and he said, well, you can't definitively identify spiders from photographs. You really have to examine them in the hand, which of course I rarely net insects. And he said, but looking at that picture, he said, this is a species of spider that doesn't occur on the west side of Lake Michigan. So there's always something to discover. If you can picture a map of North America with Pennsylvania on the east and Missouri on the west and Alberta on the north and Ontario on the south, that's a big chunk of North America. This is called a partridge scallops. It's a little guy. It's maybe a quarter of an inch, third of an inch long. And it occurs in that big square of North America. We don't know an awful lot about it. because it's not big enough or bad enough or beautiful enough for people to really take notice. We know a lot about the insects that are plant pests, and we know a lot about the big, beautiful monarch butterflies, but a lot of the insects that I research don't have a lot written about them. So, my advice, go outside to look for bugs, and this is one of the things you might find. I took this picture at Wabadonia Park on the Milwaukee River, and this is a bunch of powdered dancer damselflies. The male grabs hold of the female when they are mating, and when they're finished mating, they go down and the females stand on the edge of aquatic plants, and they reach their abdomen way underwater, and they lay their eggs in plant stems underwater. And sometimes the female goes completely underwater. If you look at the set of damselflies on the top right-hand side, you can see the male's abdomen is underwater, and the female's wings are sticking out from the water because she is all the way underwater. And the reason he hangs on to her like that is because if he doesn't, another male might come along and grab her and mate with her, and then his DNA would get passed on instead of the first male. This is the address for the Bug of the Week series that I do. It's archived at the UWM Field Station website under their Natural History tab. If you just Google UWM Field Station, you'll get to their home page, and you'll be able to find it too. Tiger swallowtails are my absolute favorite insect. I saw this on the road near my house a couple years ago. So you just go out and look for insects. The monarch butterflies were settling in for the night on the road where I lived. The butterfly is a great spangled fritillary. So, most nature programs end with a sunset slide, and here's your sunset slide, the dew-covered web of one of the orb weavers.
That was great. Kate, yes, great presentation, Kate. I'm hoping that you're on. We do have a Kate that I'm hoping is the right Kate.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you. Okay, so great. Okay, so we have a couple of questions, but I would really hope that other folks can keep questions coming. I'll start with the ones that are in the chat box, but I would feel free to unmute yourself and ask Kate questions yourself. So one question we have is, how many bugs are killed when trees are sprayed with pyrethrum to kill mosquitoes? We have a lot of Mosquito Joe business here.
Okay, well, I have to say that that's not the kind of information that I have at hand, but I am in favor of extremely cautious use of any kind of pesticide or herbicide, because especially with the pesticides that are supposed to kill insects, very few of them are specific to one kind of insect. So there's a lot of collateral damage whenever you spray. That's about as good as I can do on that. I don't have numbers. I'm having so much fun going out and taking pictures of insects that I don't even think about controlling them.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to think about it. Do other folks have questions for Kate?
Well, you know, that was an awful lot of information that people just absorbed, and I suspect everybody's heads are spinning, and you're going to have to do a little digesting about some of that. But I've mentioned that I do a bug of the week email blast, which ends up being archived at the UW Field Station website. And my mission statement, as far as that project is concerned, is less stepping on bugs. So I'm hoping that people will get an appreciation for the really amazing individual lives that insects lead, and will stop and look at them next time, because a lot of the insects that you saw in this program are insects that a lot of people just walk past. So not only less stepping at bugs, but maybe more stopping and looking at bugs.
Yeah,
And by the way, I use the word bug in sort of a kindergarten classification of bug. If you're talking to an entomologist, they will tell you that there's only one of those groups, and that's the Hemiptera, that actually can be called bugs. But hey, they're all bugs, right?
Yes. So we have a couple more questions. So Linda asks, my wife hates bugs/insects. If found in the house, I trap them and toss them outside. Is that a death sentence? For instance, a cellar spider.
Well, I've never seen a cellar spider outside, so I suspect that when you toss that cellar spider out, it probably will find someplace to live underneath the eaves of the house, someplace close to the warmth that the house generates. I gave my insect program years ago, and a woman came up after the program was over with and said, I really don't like bugs. She said, but I like your bugs because they're sanitized. And I said, sanitized? And she said, they don't look like they're about to run up my leg. So, think about insects kind of one at a time. Most of them have no desire to hurt you. They're just doing their thing. And if you insist on grabbing them and squeezing them, then you'll probably find out what their capability is. But just sit and watch.
Over your many years of bug observing, do you see more quote unquote southern bugs moving north as climate changes?
Not really. There's a spectacular exception to that, and that is a butterfly called the giant swallowtail butterfly. It's called the orange dog down in the southern part of its range in Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, places like that, because the caterpillar feeds on the leaves of orange trees, which I suspect is not very popular. But the giant swallowtail, it's bigger than the tiger swallowtail I showed you, and we always had some of them visit us every summer, but more and more we're seeing them pretty early. Like I've seen them in the middle of May, and they were in just pristine condition, and I was thinking, this guy did not fly up from Kentucky. Conventional wisdom is that it's too cold for them to have their pupal cases survive, but I think that they are surviving, and there probably are a few other insects like that.
Great. Yeah, a lot of people are sharing a lot of support and thanking you for your presentation. Can you see the chat box yourself, Kate?
What's a chat box?
Okay, so I'll just read these two.
I'm the lowest tech person in 3 counties, so.
I think you should hear some of the great feedback you're getting. So thank you so much for great information. I love organic gardening, so it's fun to watch bugs eat aphids, no insecticides needed. One of the best presentations ever. Fabulous. Great program. Thank you. Such an amazing collection of photos coupled with fascinating stories. Lots of amazing info. Thank you. Thanks. So lots of people really appreciating your presentation.
Well, thank you very much.
Any last questions for Kate? And if you do have any questions that you think of after, once you have that time to digest, feel free to email us at info@wglbvo, and we'll forward questions along. Someone asked how to hear your bug of the week. I think that's an article, correct?
It is. It's a weekly email blast, and as I say, it's archived. If you go to the UWM Field Station website, they have a natural history tab, and it's the only thing in that natural history tab. And I just posted number 627. So you can do a little, if you break a leg or get snowed in or something like that, you have a little reading there.
Yeah, so Sarah just shared that. So that's the link where you can find it directly. And I would really recommend it. It's really opened my eyes to insects. Okay. Well, unless somebody has another question and wants to unmute and ask, I would love to thank Kate one more time and wish everyone a good evening. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.